So I found that using like software shortcuts and that kind of thing can like really cut your working time down. You know, when I first graduated, I knew the really simple ones, you know, Command Z and that kind of thing. But while I was working as an art worker, obviously they did need me to do things quite quickly. And as the months went on, I did get, you know, more familiar with some of the shortcuts, you know, Command L to lock things. And that was faster for me than putting things on different layers. And it meant that, you know, I wasn't accidentally moving things around in the document. So that was really important.
Yeah, a lot of people think that the keyboard shortcuts is not something you really need to learn. You can just use those basic ones that everyone knows. But to be honest, even the basic ones are things that you can customize. In Adobe applications, all the shortcuts can be customized. And you know, like Command or Control Z is undo in most applications. In Photoshop, it's actually only going back one step. And then it comes front again, or like it goes back and forth. So what I do normally is I change in all the applications undo, or step backward as it's called in Photoshop, to F1, the function key, and then F2 for going forward. And then that way it's the same in all applications, no difference between Photoshop, InDesign and Illustrator. And also instead of holding two keys, I'm just pressing one key. Plus the function keys are the only keys that you can use without Control or Command. So it's not a combination, it's just simply one key. Another thing that I found people do, and it's quite frustrating to see, is that they are scrolling with the mouse wheel. Or even like using the scrolls on the side or on the bottom. Yeah. Now, I might be a bit harsh on this, but it's really like unprofessional to do that, because it's a very basic shortcut, the space bar. You can just hold down the space bar, and in all of the Adobe applications, that's what you use to pan around. It's like the hand tool. But in InDesign, for example, instead of using the space, for example, to move between pages, what I would recommend everyone to use is the Alt or Option page up, page down. Or if you don't have page up, page down, you can also use the function key and then combine it with the up and down arrows, because that's going to switch between the pages instead of like scrolling and getting like in between two pages. It's just really...
And getting lost in the document.
Exactly. It's harder for you, but especially if you have someone watching you doing something or doing it together with someone, or showing it to a client, then it's really going to be confusing for them. So it's worth remembering these. And also just one other thing I found is that selecting text, for example, most people would use the mouse to go over and highlight things. But again, I would use the keyboard for that. Like, you know, if you hold down Shift key and you use the arrows, as you go or you move your cursor, it keeps selecting. And if you combine it with Control or Command, you jump between words and select. And if you use up and down arrows, you can even select paragraphs very quickly. So it's all there as shortcuts, but very few people use it, and it actually speeds up a lot your work.
Yeah, definitely it does, yeah.
And the cool thing is all of these that I mentioned are the same in Illustrator, InDesign and Photoshop. So once you learn it or you set it up, it's going to be the same in all of these applications.
Fantastic. That's actually a good thing to mention, that it's great that the Adobe software is so collaborative. You know, it allows you to work, you know, quite similarly in each application. But it is definitely important to remember that each separate application has a very specific way and you like to use it and use. So for example, you know, if you're starting to try and create a logo in Photoshop, it's just not going to work, because obviously, you know, you're not working in vectors, you're working in pixels. And I think that's something to really consider when you're graduating, is that to make sure that you're using the correct software for, you know, the correct project that you're working on. Similar with, you know, file formats, you know, what are you saving your work as? Is it a PNG? Is it a JPEG? Are you saving it in CMYK or RGB? Does it need to be printed? That kind of thing. I think, you know, like you say, it's easy to be very creative and create something fantastic, but if you don't know how to then export that and print it, it could come out looking very different to how it does on screen.
Yeah, it's always worth checking with your printer what you do. So again, don't feel intimidated to ask questions. You are new to this, you just came from uni, so a printer will always help. And if you are open about these things that you are asking, they will be happy to help most of the time. And then again, you learn a lot from them. So you are not expected to know everything that they know, because they are specialists in their field. And even if you have to do something for the web and you are not comfortable, you haven't done much web graphics before, just talk to someone who you know are good at it. Yeah. And you might learn that instead of using a PNG file, you can just use an SVG, which is still keeping it in vectors, but it can be used on a website. So it's a scalable vector graphic. And another thing that I think is very important is to keep up to date with new features. So, I mean, Adobe is constantly updating their software, and the Creative Cloud is all about that, that is constantly adding new features. And they really try to have people adapt to these and start using their new features. So they give out tutorials, they show you, give tool tips of how it works. A good example is the Creative Cloud libraries. I don't know if you started using the libraries panel in any of the Adobe applications.
Little bit, not a lot.
Yeah, so again, it's something that they really worked hard on. And when they released it, it wasn't as good, but now it got really strong. And one thing that I really like is the files that you can store in your Creative Cloud account. So if you store files and you make changes to them and you overwrite the file, which you just mentioned, that be careful of overwriting. It's actually something, if it was in your Creative Cloud account, you can actually revert back to a previous version. So it saves a backup. It's almost like a history, but without having the file open, it can go back to previous versions. And your clients can even comment and see the files on the browser if you have them shared via link or something.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll definitely have to look and start using that for my own clients, and I think that'll be helpful again for saving things in the cloud without clogging up your computer with too many back copies. So I think that's a really good point. I think another really good thing that I've started doing since I graduated is to always have kind of a resources folder based on things that I've found, assets that I've downloaded, you know, mock-ups or typefaces or things that I think might come in handy. You know, sometimes bundles come up and you think, oh, I don't need that right now, but actually it might be a good idea to get it and, you know, just pop it in an assets folder somewhere. You never know when it's going to come in handy for presenting your work to a client, or as we were saying, like your social media profile is a great way to showcase your work. And I think if you're doing that as professionally as possible, you can really gain some good experience from that.